Hi guys, this is John from worldstoughestworkouts.com. Today I've got my cousin Lee Merrien on the line. Lee's a British cross-country athlete and a sub 4 minute miler, and he also coaches a lot of up-and-coming runners. So I want to pick his brains on his training and what it takes to get to such a high level. Lee, thanks for joining us today. Can you start by telling us a bit more about your background, the events you compete in, and your current goals in your sport?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, over the past season or so, I've been competing for Great Britain at the recent World Cross Country Championships in Jordan, and that was in March. And then at the end of last year, I competed for Great Britain when we picked up a bronze medal in the team event at the European Cross Country Championships. I also compete on the track as well. As I mentioned, I suppose one of the sort of significant notes for people who are runners and non-runners alike was a sub 4 minute mile a couple of seasons ago on the track. And with the summer coming up, I'll be racing on the track this year over sort of 5,000 and 10,000 metres. Looking to improve my times and pick up some medals with those events.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to take a bit of a funny stance here and start with weight training. I want to ask you about that. There seems to be a big split amongst running coaches on how endurance runners should approach weight training. I know Mel Siff in his book Super Training says that the pace kind of slows down towards the end of a race because of reduced stride length, which ultimately comes down to insufficient strength. He says there's no difference really between VO2 max in elite middle distance runners now compared to 1940, so in his opinion, it's got to be down to strength training. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you approach your weight training?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was an interesting statistic about the VO2 max, and from the 40s, I wouldn't know too much on that side of things, but I would know that, or what I would say is that VO2 max isn't the only kind of performance indicator, I guess, in a middle and long distance athlete. You can beat an athlete who's got a better VO2 max than you, and that's partly down to being able to run out a higher percentage of that VO2 max. And I think that comes through a combination of developing your training in different areas. But in terms of the strength element, yes, that's important. And I do strength training, conventional and running specific work as well, which can take the forms of lots of different things. I mean, I think you need to have the strength base there to be like, I guess, like you're questioning there with Mel Siff. But good functional stuff for that would be hurdle walkovers and that sort of thing. Learn to run tall, be strong in a running position so you can maintain strength and power at the end of the run. But obviously, if you're getting the pace right at the end of the day, you won't finish slowly because the pace judgment becomes a factor in that too.
Okay, so do you do any kind of maximum strength work? The kind of typical really heavy low reps. Do you do any kind of that kind of training, or is it more?
I'll do not so much. We'll say low reps. I guess I'm doing like sort of 8 to 12 repetitions of some conventional exercises like squatting at certain times of the year, with other single leg exercises in there like single leg RDLs, which is perhaps a bit more functional. So that kind of stuff coming in there, and other hamstring work and general core stability work will all fit into that. Nothing secretive. Nothing that no one else doesn't do, whether it's for running or for other sports. But I think it's important to also have in there the running specific conditioning, which I think hurdle walkovers and that kind of thing, going back to that, I think is a really great way of developing that side of things from a running environment.
So it's kind of technique efficiency is really important as well then?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you have to technically, running style and working on developing and strengthening your the fixators and synergists and all that sort of thing can be done a little bit more functionally through balance work and walkovers. Whilst I do conventional stuff like squatting and things, and this is from a personal perspective for me as a runner, I often just have to be careful that I'm addressing my, not working on and doing quad dominant exercises when I've got, say, problems with my hips and my glutes to make sure I stay on top of, so I stay injury free. So being able to do some of the more functional stuff is a good way of cross hatching that, I think.
Awesome. Okay, so in terms of on-season and off-season, how does your training differ? I know a lot of runners will just completely avoid any kind of weight training during the season, so they're not sore, they're not tiring their legs out too much. How does your on-season differ to your off-season?
Well, I'm never really, the thing is I have at the moment, this season I've done like a 3-peak season, so I'm having little in terms of what I would describe as an off-season in the same way like a footballer has, say, a couple of months off. I'm not. I very rarely get that. I'll take only a week or two break at the end of the summer and a week after the major cross-country peaks, and the Europeans and the World Cross Country Championships being those two this year. But in terms of, say, the weight training during that, maybe in the early stages of the winter, I'll do a little bit more general work there when I'm not racing as much, and don't have to worry about carrying tired legs into races, or perhaps the races are low key anyhow. So I'm not too bothered about the race as a target, not necessarily to win the race, but just to get a good hard run out and blow the cobwebs away. So that's not so much of a factor. In terms of, say, later in the season, in terms of when the racing's coming thick and fast, particularly during the summer months, I will do a little bit less, certainly a step back with that kind of work, trying to stay on top of it, but so I'm not completely missing it out, but and you don't lose too much of it too early in the season, because the summer season's quite long. So obviously, if you cut that out too soon, then you might perhaps pay for that later in the season.
Okay, so let's say you've got a big race coming up, say this weekend. You've got a week before the race. How will you kind of taper your training before that race?
Funnily enough, I have got a race coming up this week, and this week I haven't done too much. I haven't done any kind of heavy weights work this week at all. I've kept in some functional stuff, so I'm keeping some conditioning in there, but I haven't done any, say, the conventional stuff like reverting to a squat or anything with a sort of heavy weight on it. But I have done some general core stuff in the early part of the week, and I've done some functional stuff only yesterday. So.
Okay, just when you say core training, what sort of core training do you mean? Because everyone seems to have their sort of own opinions on what core training really involves. What does yours actually look like?
Yeah, this week it was quite general stuff on the Monday. So it was more to address sort of postural and general strength issues. So I was sort of working on, say, like a combination of reverse crunch exercises, because I have weak lower abdominal muscles, or weaker lower abdominal muscles, and exercises to stabilise the hips and things involving side bridges and with pulsing and balancing and lifting one leg to try and make it a little bit more running functional, that kind of stuff really.
Cool, I think you made a good point there, how you kind of obviously group core training with glute training and strengthening the hips. I think that's the problem with a lot of people. They just think core means their abs and the muscles under their abs. How important do you think it is to be working on the glutes, whatever kind of training you're doing?
Vital, yeah. Without having strong glutes, they're the prime muscle in sort of explosive movement for running. So yeah, I think particularly for myself as well, I have in the past, I think this has got better for me. But without being strong in those muscles, you're going to run a little bit lower, because you're kind of not activating or able to fire up your glutes as much, and that's critical as a runner. Doesn't really get much more important than that. So.
Okay, now you just mentioned being explosive for running. Now, a lot of people say, "Oh, he's an endurance runner, middle distance runner. He doesn't need to have that kind of sprint ability." Do you perform any kind of sprint-based sessions? How does your training look like from that point of view?
Yeah, touch on it. It's difficult to I think the hard part of it is getting a balance of it within when you're doing heavy mileage, because the effects of that training leaves you unable to, say, perform a workout to the best of your ability if you were more fresh and recovered from training, obviously. But I try and touch on it, say, in the winter months, for example. I'll keep strides in after run just to keep some leg turnover, so you're not getting too far removed from it. But you're not obviously able to, if I was to time myself running 100 metres or 200 metres, for example, it wouldn't be as good as it would be if I was in lighter training load, for example. But I don't need to be able to run, as fast as a 100-metre runner for 100 metres, but I do need to be able to run still quick at the end of a race, and especially in a tactical race. So. And to be able to react to change of paces in a race and that kind of thing. So I'll do things like strides after some aerobic runs just to keep in touch with that. So that won't be flat out, but that might be sort of 80 or 90%, so it's still relevant, there's still some specificness there. And then I'll also maybe put in once a week during certain times of the season some hill sprints. So I've got a bit of another form of resistance work in there. Again, it's a running form, so I'll do something like 8 to 10. Maybe only 80 metres, so it's all sort of CP kind of work, but it has a resistance in there, so that I'm kind of not too steep, so I'm adjusting my running style, but enough to give me a bit of resistance